The destructive force of the blast had not only leveled buildings within several blocks of the epicenter, it had shown its brute strength in many other ways. A string of railroad cars was completely lifted off their tracks, coming to rest a few feet away. The steel rails that had formed the train tracks so straight and true now lay bent and twisted. A 500-pound gas pump from a nearby service station was launched into the air, traveling over the railroad cars and landing nearly 300 feet away. The thunderous explosion was followed by an almost eerie calm. However, that tranquility would last but a moment as fires began to erupt in the wake of the blast. Firefighters Floyd Epperly and Leonard Stender from Engine Company 4 on the west side of town had responded to the initial alarm and were met at the scene by Lieutenant Leroy Seibold. The three had begun laying a line of hose on the backside of the Garretson building to attack the initial blaze when the dynamite exploded. They were knocked to the ground by the surge, with Epperly suffering burns to his hands and all three receiving ruptured eardrums from the concussion. Lieutenant Donald Starmer and firefighter Robert Logan responded from the department's main station, rushing to the scene of the blast, only to discover the body of Assistant Chief McFarland, as well as two other fatalities. Roseburg Fire Chief W.E. Mills had been off duty at the time, and when he learned of the disaster, he suffered a heart attack. With Chief Mills incapacitated and McFarland dead, Starmer unexpectedly found himself as acting chief and quickly assumed command. Engine 5, the first truck to respond, had been completely ruined and its hoses had been severed. As Starmer and Logan stretched out new hose lines to nearby hydrants, the smoldering buildings around them suddenly burst into flames. Unable to defend their position, they quickly fled the scene, driving their fire engine through sheets of flame and falling power and telephone lines. Just across the railroad tracks from where you're standing were several large liquefied petroleum gas tanks. Initially, many Roseburg residents believed that it was these LPG tanks that had caught fire and created the ensuing blast. Lieutenant Starmer understood the potential for another disaster in the aftermath of the explosion, and he rapidly deployed men to the tank farm to cool it down with their fire hoses. At the same time, the hot particles of blast debris had been pushed up into the night sky as an enormous fireball, which began to rain back down onto the buildings below, creating a number of spot fires, including the roof of the Southern Pacific Railroad depot in front of you. Roseburg called out to outlying communities for help, and fire departments from all over the county responded to the wounded city. Fire trucks came from as far away as Eugene and Springfield, 70 miles to the north, as well as the North Bend and Coos Bay fire departments on the Oregon coast. Unfortunately, each fire department outside of Roseburg was on its own radio frequency, making communications difficult at best. In addition, the power outage downtown had disabled radio dispatches between Roseburg firefighters and their main station, making a coordinated attack extremely tough. Lieutenant Starmer, third in command when the evening began, and now in charge of saving what was left of his damaged city, was about to wager everything on his hastily devised plan to control the blaze. He gathered all the firefighting resources at his disposal and stationed them at key locations along Pine, Cass, and Stevens streets, close to where you're currently situated. Firemen stood their ground, forming a fire line here while leaving the rest of the city unprotected. Had the fire escaped this perimeter, the damage could have been far greater than it already was. But Starmer's bet paid off. The fire line held, and firefighters brought the blaze under control within about 2 hours.
Don Starmer done a fantastic job. The response was amazing, and from how far away they came. They had fired units and people from all over coming in there to help them out. As far as Eugene, they sent a truck down there. Amazing how many people volunteered to help out for something like that. But that's firemen for you.
At the peak of the blaze, over 45 buildings were involved, covering 7 city blocks. Dawn broke over the valley that morning as it had done thousands of times before. This morning, though, things would be different. As the rays of sun spread over the smoldering remains of the city, it became obvious that life in Roseburg would never be the same.